The more a person identifies with their persona, the more hostile the unconscious becomes. It happens quietly, not with shouting, but with cracks forming in the mask you've been wearing for years. You smile, but your eyes don't follow. You say, "I'm fine," but your voice hesitates, your shoulders tighten, and the air between words grows heavy. That's the language of the soul, the one that never lies. We live in a world that teaches us to be composed, efficient, always in control. We wear masks that fit the expectations of others so well that, after a while, we forget what our real face looks like. Yet beneath every performance, something restless keeps breathing. Jung once said, "No one can wear a mask without it growing into his skin." And that's what happens. We become the mask, and the truth gets trapped underneath, pressing to be seen. Think about the last time you said, "Nothing's wrong," when your whole body was trembling. The last time your smile didn't reach your eyes, or your words sounded distant even to yourself. The unconscious doesn't respect the scripts of politeness. It leaks through tone, posture, silence. You can't command it, because it doesn't speak the language of logic. It speaks in slips, in sudden irritations, in the way your breath shortens when someone touches a wound you thought was healed. Jung believed that every unspoken emotion continues to live inside us, not dead, but waiting. The parts of ourselves we hide don't disappear. They learn new ways to show up, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in tension, sometimes in the words we never meant to say, but did. The persona may fool the world, but the unconscious refuses to be ignored. And that's where the danger begins, because when truth is suppressed for too long, it doesn't fade. It fights for a voice. It finds cracks in the mask, seeps through laughter, hides in silence. That's when life itself starts mirroring back what you've been trying to avoid. People start reflecting your repressed feelings. Situations keep repeating the same pain, and the outer world begins to echo the chaos inside. The mirror fogs. You wipe it, but it blurs again, not because the glass is dirty, but because you're breathing too close to what's real. You think you can keep pretending, keep smiling, keep holding it together. But what happens when the unconscious begins to speak louder than your willpower? What happens when the silence starts saying everything you've been afraid to admit? Your body is always speaking, not in words, but in sensations. A tightening in your chest, a sudden headache, a lump in your throat that has nothing to do with sickness. These are not random. They're messages. Jung wrote in The Nature of the Psyche that the unconscious behaves in a compensatory way toward the consciousness. When the mind insists on silence, the body becomes a voice. When you say, "I'm fine," but your jaw clenches, the unconscious is correcting the lie. You can fool your friends, your co-workers, even your own reflection for a while, but not your nervous system. The body keeps the score of everything we refuse to feel. Every suppressed emotion leaves a trace, a signal, a vibration that seeks release. The more we repress, the louder the symptoms become. That migraine isn't just stress. That fatigue that comes from nowhere isn't just being tired. They are metaphors, the soul's way of saying, something inside me is unbalanced. Think about it. When you pretend to be calm in a conflict, yet your breathing turns shallow, that's the unconscious breaking through the surface. It doesn't speak English or Spanish or logic. It speaks in muscle tension, in heart rate, in temperature. It doesn't argue, it compensates. If you hide your anger, it becomes stiffness. If you deny your sadness, it turns into emptiness. The psyche, like nature, always seeks balance, and when consciousness refuses to adjust, the unconscious takes over the conversation. Jung saw illness not merely as dysfunction, but as dialogue, a dream, a symptom, a slip of the tongue. All are invitations to awareness. But modern life has trained us to shut the door. We call anxiety just stress, depression a phase, and burnout success. We medicate silence, numb pain, label emotion as weakness. And yet, beneath the polished mask, the body keeps whispering what the mouth won't dare to say. Sometimes, that whisper becomes a shout. Relationships break down without knowing why. The body collapses when everything finally goes right. We call it coincidence, but the psyche calls a correction. The unconscious is not our enemy. It's the part of us still trying to bring truth back into balance. So, What if your so-called self-control isn't control at all? What if it's repression, a beautiful cage disguised as strength? Imagine your psyche as a house with 2 floors. Upstairs is the bright, organized room where you greet visitors. Polite, composed, everything in its place. That's your persona, the version of you that society applauds. You know how to smile, how to sound confident, how to say, "I'm doing great." The walls smell like productivity and control. But if you walk down the narrow stairs, past a closed door, you'll find another space, darker, quieter, where the air feels heavier. That's where your shadow lives. It holds every emotion you've ever exiled. Anger, envy, fear, desire, tenderness you were told was weakness. Jung described the persona as a mask shaped by collective expectations, a survival tool that allows us to function. But survival has a price. The more you perform the role, the less you remember the actor behind it. And below that perfect living room, the basement starts to move. The shadow doesn't vanish. It waits. It hides in sarcasm, in the way your tone sharpens when someone touches a truth you've buried. It sneaks into dreams and small acts of rebellion, whispering the words you never say out loud. In the ego and the unconscious, Jung warned, the more a person identifies with their persona, the more the unconscious becomes hostile. That hostility isn't punishment, it's pressure. When we refuse to integrate our darker aspects, the unconscious compensates. It leaks through our defenses, demanding recognition. What you call bad luck or sabotage may be the psyche's desperate attempt to restore balance. Every rejection you project onto others is often something you once rejected in yourself. Think of the moments when you've lost your temper over something small, or felt irrationally jealous, or despised someone for traits you secretly fear you have. That's the basement sending smoke through the floorboards. It's not evil, it's unlived life. Jung believed that the shadow once faced holds the key to authenticity. It's the place where our buried creativity and strength lie dormant, disguised as flaws. But few dare to visit that lower floor. It's easier to keep polishing the mask than to face the dust below. We post smiles, we quote positivity, we say, "I've moved on," while something downstairs whispers otherwise. And the longer we ignore that voice, the louder it becomes, until the whole house trembles. Because there's something more dangerous than hiding your feelings. It's starting to believe the mask is you. There's a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when pretending becomes habit. You wake up, put on your smile like armor, and move through the day as if reading lines from a script you no longer remember writing. The image in the mirror still looks like you, but something in its eyes feels distant, like an actor tired of the role. That's the first crack. The mask no longer protects. It imprisons. You start mistaking numbness for peace, exhaustion for stability, silence for strength. The mirror begins to fracture, and every reflection looks slightly distorted. When we live only for appearance, the self starts to divide. The body moves, but the soul stops following. You function. You answer messages. You smile in photos. You even say, "I'm good." But beneath the performance, there's a hollow sound, a faint echo of the person you used to be. Jung warned that repression doesn't make pain disappear. It buries it alive. What's buried doesn't rest. It decays, it ferments, it poisons the soil of our inner life until symptoms bloom like weeds. Neurosis, Jung said, is not a curse but a message. It's the soul's rebellion against spiritual neglect. The soul needs conflict, he wrote. The absence of conflict is death. To avoid discomfort is to interrupt the process of becoming whole. When you silence emotion long enough, it doesn't die. It turns against you. The headaches, the anxiety, the unexplained fatigue, all are forms of the psyche shouting through the cracks. See me, feel me, stop pretending. Imagine the mirror again. Once it breaks, you can still see your face, but never in one piece. That's what repression does. It shatters perception. You start distrusting your instincts, dismissing your needs, apologizing for your feelings. You live as a fragment of yourself, endlessly adjusting to fit an image that was never truly yours. The world applauds your composure, unaware of the chaos backstage. And in private moments, when applause fades, you feel it, that silent panic that whispers, "Something's missing and it's me." Jung believed the way out wasn't perfection but participation. the courage to let the unconscious speak without disguise. Because ignoring what hurts doesn't protect you, it disconnects you. And no one can live too long inside a body where the truth is suffocating. But Jung discovered a path, a way to turn those unconscious signals into living awareness. Transformation doesn't begin with a grand revelation. It begins with a whisper. The soul rarely shouts. It nudges, it aches, it repeats. The first step, Jung would say, is recognition. Not fixing, not analyzing, just noticing. The tension in your shoulders, the heaviness that arrives at night, the dreams that keep circling the same theme. When you pause long enough to witness these signals without judgment, you open the first door between the conscious and the unconscious. You start translating the body's language back into meaning. The next step is integration. Here, you stop labeling parts of yourself as enemies. The anger you despise, the fear you hide, the sadness you silence. They're not here to destroy you. They're here to guide you. Each symptom, each emotion, each dream fragment is an emissary from the deeper self. Jung called this the movement toward wholeness, a natural rhythm of the psyche trying to reconcile opposites. When you recognize the message behind the discomfort, you no longer fight the unconscious. You collaborate with it. Then comes conscious action. Awareness without expression is like insight trapped in a bottle. The energy that emerges through emotion needs a channel. That might mean writing until truth spills onto paper, painting without plan, walking in silence, or praying not for answers, but for clarity. Jung believed the creative act was sacred because it allowed the psyche to speak symbolically, transforming raw emotion into revelation. What was once pain becomes pattern. What was chaos becomes communication. Finally, there's legacy. Once you begin to live from a place of truth, your presence itself becomes medicine. You stop demanding perfection from others because you met your own imperfection with compassion. You start allowing people to feel what they feel because you've learned the cost of pretending. Authenticity becomes contagious. Your peace gives permission for others to be real. In the nature of the psyche, Jung called this process a transcendent function, writing that it unites conscious and unconscious contents, allowing the passage from one attitude to another without loss of the unconscious. It's the alchemy of awareness, turning conflict into connection. Because when you finally listen to what your body and soul have been trying to say, life stops being a performance and becomes a dialogue. You begin to live, not as a collection of reactions, but as a whole being. But even this path has its traps. Every seeker faces a moment when the light they've kindled begins to blind them. At first, awareness feels like liberation. The thrill of finally seeing the hidden patterns, the satisfaction of understanding why you hurt, why you react, why you repeat. But soon, that same fire can turn dangerous. Like an apprentice who learns to summon flame and mistakes control for mastery, the ego starts whispering, "I've healed. I understand. I'm above it now." That's the first spark of inflation, when consciousness expands faster than humility. Jung called this inflation of the ego, the illusion that knowing your emotions is the same as transforming them. You start explaining instead of experiencing, diagnosing instead of feeling. Pain becomes theory, not touch. You say, "I know my shadow," yet still reject anyone who mirrors it back to you. The mind builds a fortress of insight to avoid the vulnerability of change. But the unconscious cannot be tricked. It knows when understanding is armor. Then comes the spiritual isolation. You retreat from the world, convinced that solitude equals enlightenment. You begin to speak a language others can't follow, confusing detachment with peace. But isolation is not transcendence. It's fear dressed in holiness. Jung warned that even the pursuit of light can become a disguise for avoiding life. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. True growth happens not above the world, but within it. In the ordinary, the messy, the human. Another trap is the savior complex, the impulse to fix others while your own wounds still bleed. It feels noble, but it's often avoidance in disguise. Healing projected outward spares us from facing what hurts within. And then there's regression, the quiet slide back into old habits under the illusion of being beyond them. The psyche, like nature, always tests authenticity. It asks, Have you lived what you learned or only understood it? Each of these traps is the ego's way of reclaiming control when the soul begins to awaken. The real initiation isn't about shining brighter. It's about carrying the light without arrogance, letting it illuminate rather than dominate. Wholeness demands humility, to know that every insight is only a mirror, not a throne. Because when you walk through all these layers and still bow to the mystery, something extraordinary happens. When you finally stop hiding what you feel, something sacred begins to unfold. The tension that once held your body hostage releases. The breath deepens. The eyes soften. The world, which once looked distant and artificial, becomes real again. Colors sharpen. Sounds return. Time slows down. You realize that truth was never the enemy. Resistance was. The pain you feared was not in feeling, but in fighting to stay numb. When the armor falls, the soul breathes, and you meet yourself, perhaps for the first time, without performance. Jung believed that wholeness isn't achieved through perfection, but through honesty. To see oneself clearly, shadow and all, is not a punishment, it's grace. The mirror, once fogged by fear and pretense, clears. You look and, instead of judging, you recognize. You see the child who wanted love, the adult who tried to control it, and the timeless being beneath both, patient, steady, waiting. The reflection no longer accuses you. It invites you. You're not who you thought you were, and that's the miracle. And as you begin to live from that still center, the world around you changes. People stop being puzzles to decode and become mirrors to honor. You no longer need to prove, to defend, to perform. The same silence that once felt unbearable now feels holy, because it's full of presence. Every word, every gesture, every connection becomes an act of transparency. You're not trying to impress life anymore. You're participating in it. This is what Jung meant when he said that the individual becomes whole only by facing himself. It's not self-obsession, it's self-revelation. To see without fleeing is to love without condition. The opposites within you stop fighting and start conversing. The shadow no longer hides in the basement. It sits beside you at the table, at peace. The persona no longer performs. It serves. What was divided becomes one. And that's the quiet triumph, not loud, not grand, but deeply human. Because the truest things don't need to shout to be heard. What is true never needs to be said out loud. If this message resonated, take a breath and comment below. I choose to be transparent.